Hey guys, Rusty Historian here, and tonight we're diving into something that's probably kept you awake at 3 a.m. scrolling through time travel theories on Reddit. What should you do if you woke up in medieval times? So before you get too comfortable in that modern chair with your electricity-powered device, hit that like button if you enjoy this kind of deep dive, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It's good to know you and to feel that the work we put in is being seen. Now, dim the lights, maybe grab a snack, preferably something that won't give you dysentery because, spoiler alert, that's about to become a very real concern. And let's jump in. Picture this. You go to sleep tonight in your cozy bed, probably after doom scrolling TikTok for 3 hours like a responsible adult, and you wake up somewhere else. Somewhere that smells like a combination of unwashed human, rotting vegetables, and what you can only hope is mud, but probably isn't. You're lying on what feels like a pile of hay that's seen better days. Specifically, it's seen days when it wasn't doubling as someone's bathroom. The air is thick, almost chewy with smoke and God knows what else. And that sound you're hearing, that's not your neighbor's leaf blower at 7 a.m. That's the beautiful medieval symphony of people hawking up phlegm, pigs squealing, and someone in the distance having what sounds like a very public mental breakdown. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the Middle Ages. And before you start romanticizing knights in shining armor and fairy tale castles, let me be the bearer of some very bad news. You're about to discover that HBO's Game of Thrones was actually the sanitized, family-friendly version of medieval life. The first thing that hits you isn't the sight or the sound, it's the smell. Imagine taking a deep whiff of a gym bag that's been left in a hot car for 6 months, mixing it with the essence of a porta potty at a music festival, adding a dash of rotting fish, and then having someone breathe that directly into your nostrils while wearing a wool sock as a face mask. That's just Tuesday morning in 1347. You stumble to your feet, probably wearing whatever you fell asleep in, which means you're either in pajamas, underwear, or if you're really unlucky, that banana costume from last Halloween that seemed hilarious at the time. Either way, you're going to stand out like a neon sign in a coal mine. The ground beneath your feet squelches. Actually squelches. And you realize with dawning horror that medieval streets weren't paved with good intentions. They were paved with about 3 inches of what historians politely call organic matter, but what you and I would call literally everything that's ever fallen out of a human or animal body. People are staring at you, and not in a good way. You're surrounded by folks who look like they've been method acting as peasants for the past 30 years. Their clothes are brown, not fashionably brown, not earth tone brown, brown from dirt, sweat, and substances you don't want to think about. Their teeth, and this is where it gets fun, their teeth look like a box of broken crayons. The lucky ones have gaps. The unlucky ones have brown stumps that would make a meth addict feel superior about their dental hygiene. And they're all looking at you like you just dropped out of the sky, which, from their perspective, you basically did. This is your first critical decision point. How you handle the next few minutes will literally determine whether you live to see your second day in the Middle Ages or end up as an entertaining anecdote someone tells while they're burning your body for witchcraft. Let's talk about your immediate problems. First, the language barrier. Unless you happen to speak Middle English, Old French, Latin, or one of about 50 regional dialects that sound like someone gargling gravel, you're not going to understand a single word anyone says to you. And they're definitely not going to understand you. Imagine trying to order a coffee at Starbucks, but the barista speaks only Klingon and thinks caffeine is a punishment from Satan. That's basically every conversation you're about to have. Second, your appearance. You look wrong. Not just fashion wrong, but fundamentally, existentially wrong. Your clothes are made from synthetic materials that won't be invented for another 600 years. Your skin is probably cleaner than anyone they have ever seen. Your teeth, assuming you've been to a dentist sometime in the last decade, are whiter and straighter than anything they've witnessed outside of a divine vision. You are, quite literally, walking proof that their entire understanding of the world is incomplete. And historically speaking, when people encounter something that challenges their worldview, they don't usually respond by updating their beliefs. They respond by finding the nearest sharp object and trying to make the problem go away. Third, you have no status, no protection, no guild membership, no lord to vouch for you, and no family connections. In medieval society, you're quite literally nobody. And being nobody in the Middle Ages is about as healthy as being a snowball in hell. But here's the thing, and this is why I love history. People have been surviving impossible situations for thousands of years. You've got advantages that no medieval person had, even if they're not immediately obvious. You know things. You know that disease is caused by germs, not bad air. You know basic sanitation. You probably know more about medicine, agriculture, and engineering than most educated people of the time. You understand concepts like crop rotation, pasteurization, and why washing your hands is a good idea. The question is, how do you use that knowledge without getting burned at the stake for witchcraft? Let's start with immediate survival. You've got maybe 10 minutes before someone decides you're either a demon, a spy, or just really interesting to rob and murder. Time to make some friends, fast. Okay, so you're standing in what looks like the aftermath of a particularly rough Renaissance fair, where someone forgot to hire a cleanup crew for about 40 years. People are staring, pointing, and having animated conversations that probably translate to, what in the holy name of St. Francis is that thing? Your first instinct might be to approach someone and try to explain your situation. Let me save you some time. Don't. The concept of time travel won't be invented for another several centuries, and even if it was, trying to explain it to a medieval peasant is like trying to explain cryptocurrency to your grandmother. Technically possible, but likely to end with someone very confused and someone very frustrated. Instead, you need to think like a method actor who's just been thrown into the most immersive LARP of all time. Except instead of losing points when you die, you actually die. First rule, shut up. I'm serious. The moment you open your mouth, you're going to reveal that you speak like someone from the future. Because you, literally, are someone from the future. Your accent, your vocabulary, your entire way of forming sentences is going to scream, not from around here, louder than a tourist wearing socks with sandals in Paris. When someone approaches you, and someone will approach you because you're the most interesting thing that's happened in this village since the last plague outbreak, your best bet is to act confused and point to your throat. Pretend you can't speak. It buys you time and explains away your inability to communicate properly. But you're going to need to communicate eventually, so let's talk strategy. Medieval people weren't stupid. That's a myth we modern folks love because it makes us feel superior about our smartphones and indoor plumbing. These people survived famines, plagues, wars, and centuries of what can only be described as life on hard mode. They were clever, observant, and absolutely ruthless when it came to survival. They're also deeply religious in a way that modern people can barely comprehend. Everything, and I mean everything, is seen through the lens of divine will, demonic influence, or supernatural intervention. A bad harvest? God's punishment for sin. A good harvest? God's blessing for faithfulness. A weird stranger showing up with impossible clothes and pristine teeth. Well, that's either a miracle or the apocalypse, and they're not taking any chances. This is actually your first potential advantage. Medieval people expected miracles. They lived in a world where saints performed impossible feats. Angels appeared to shepherds, and divine intervention was a regular part of daily life. If you play this right, you can position yourself as someone blessed by God rather than cursed by Satan. The difference between being worshipped as a holy person and being burned as a witch often comes down to presentation and timing. Here's your survival checklist for the first hour. Look harmless. Smile a lot, but not too much. Showing those perfect teeth is going to raise questions. Keep your hands visible and open. Bow slightly to anyone who looks remotely important. Medieval society was built on hierarchy and deference, and showing respect immediately marks you as civilized rather than threatening. Find the church. Every settlement, no matter how small, has some kind of religious building, or at least a shrine. The local priest or monk is going to be one of the few people who might speak multiple languages and have some experience dealing with strangers. They're also less likely to stab you first and ask questions later, though I wouldn't bet my life on it. Observe the power structure. Figure out who's in charge. Look for better clothes, weapons, horses, or people who have other people bowing to them. You need to understand the local hierarchy because accidentally disrespecting the wrong person is a fast track to a very short stay in medieval times. Act pious. Cross yourself occasionally, even if you're not Christian. Point upward when people look at you strangely, as if to suggest your appearance is God's will. Medieval people understood divine intervention better than they understood basic hygiene, so lean into it. Don't touch anything. Seriously, don't touch their food, their animals, their tools, or their people. You don't know what's safe, what's sacred, or what's someone else's property. Property theft was often punishable by death, and I didn't know it was yours isn't a defense that's going to hold up in medieval court. Now, you're probably wondering about that church I mentioned. Let's talk about why the local religious authority is your best bet for not dying immediately, and how to approach them without looking like a demon in disguise. The medieval church wasn't just a place of worship. It was the social services department, the hospital, the school, the news network, and the only customer service desk in town, all rolled into one stone building that probably took 2 centuries to construct. Walking toward the church is your safest bet, but it's also terrifying because medieval churches weren't the friendly, welcoming places you might be imagining. These were fortress-like structures built to withstand sieges, with thick walls, small windows, and an atmosphere that screamed, God sees everything you've ever done wrong, and he's not happy about it. The priest or monk you're about to meet has probably never traveled more than 20 miles from where he was born. He speaks Latin because it's the language of education and religion, but his Latin is going to sound different from the pronunciation you might have learned in school. Think of it like trying to communicate with someone who learned English exclusively from Shakespeare while you learned it from TikTok. But here's the thing about medieval clergy. They were used to dealing with unusual situations. Pilgrims showed up speaking foreign languages. People claimed to have visions. Strangers arrived with bizarre stories about distant lands. Your weird appearance might be concerning, but it's not necessarily unprecedented. As you approach the church, you'll probably notice it's the nicest building in town by a significant margin. While everyone else is living in structures that look like they were built by blind people using only mud and hope, the church has actual stone, proper windows, and a roof that doesn't appear to be held together by prayer alone. The priest, let's call him Father Benedict because medieval priests were required by law to have biblical names, is going to approach you with a mixture of curiosity and caution. He's seen enough of life to know that strange things usually bring trouble, but he's also bound by religious duty to offer sanctuary to those who seek it. This is where your strategy gets delicate. Father Benedict is educated by medieval standards, which means he can read Latin, knows some theology, and has probably heard stories about distant lands from the occasional traveling merchant. He's also suspicious of anything that challenges the established order, because challenging the established order in medieval times was a hobby that had a very high mortality rate. You need to communicate several things without actually speaking. 1, you're not a threat. 2, you're seeking sanctuary. 3, you're Christian, or at least not actively demonic. 4, you need help. The universal sign for I need sanctuary in medieval times was to approach the church with your hands raised, palms open, and kneel at the entrance. This shows you're unarmed, respectful, and placing yourself under the protection of the church. Father Benedict is going to speak to you in Latin first, because that's the universal language of educated people. When you don't respond appropriately, because unless you're a classics professor, your Latin probably consists of veni, vidi, vici, and half-remembered Harry Potter spells, he'll try whatever local language he knows. This is your chance to establish communication. You can't speak their language, but you can understand some concepts. Point to yourself, then point upward, then clasp your hands in prayer. You're suggesting that your presence is divinely guided without actually claiming to be a saint, which would be blasphemy and probably get you killed. Father Benedict is going to be fascinated by your appearance, particularly your clothes and your health. Medieval people were used to strangers looking rough, dirty, and showing signs of malnutrition and disease. You, assuming you're a reasonably healthy modern person, are going to look like you've been living in paradise. Your skin is clearer, your posture is better, your teeth are incredible, and your clothes, even if they're just pajamas, are made with techniques and materials that won't exist for centuries. You're walking evidence of a standard of living that medieval people literally cannot imagine. This is where it gets tricky. You look too good, too healthy, too clean. In medieval thinking, there are only a few explanations for this. 1, you're blessed by God. 2, you've made a deal with Satan. 3, you're some kind of supernatural being. 4, you're royalty from a very distant land. Option 4 is probably your safest bet. Let Father Benedict come to his own conclusions about your origins, but gently guide him toward thinking you're from somewhere very far away, rather than somewhere very far away in time. Point in random directions when he asks where you're from. Look confused when he names places you should recognize. Act like you're trying to remember something important, but can't quite grasp it, as if you've suffered some kind of trauma or memory loss. Medieval people understood memory loss. They didn't understand it medically, but they recognized it as something that happened to people who'd been through terrible experiences. If you can convince Father Benedict that you're a noble or merchant from distant lands who suffered some kind of accident or attack that left you confused and unable to remember clearly, you've got a believable cover story. But you're going to need more than just sanctuary in the church. You need food, shelter, and some kind of plan for long-term survival. And that means understanding how medieval society actually worked, not how we imagine it worked. Let me tell you, it's about to get complicated. Okay. Let's pause for a reality check. You've probably got some ideas about medieval life based on movies, books, and that one semester of European history where you learned about feudalism for about 15 minutes before moving on to the Renaissance. Forget all of that. Seriously, just delete it from your brain, like it's a browser history you don't want anyone to find. Medieval society wasn't a simple hierarchy of kings, nobles, knights, and peasants all living in harmony according to some grand design. It was a chaotic, constantly shifting network of relationships, obligations, and survival strategies that would make modern corporate politics look straightforward. Here's what you need to understand. Money, as you know it, barely exists. I don't mean they use different currency. I mean most people never see actual coins in their entire lives. The medieval economy runs primarily on barter, service, and obligation. People don't get paid wages. They get fed, housed, and protected in exchange for their labor. This is simultaneously good news and terrible news for you. The terrible news is that you can't just get a job. There's no help wanted sign at the local blacksmith shop. Every occupation is controlled by guilds, and guild membership is typically inherited or earned through years of apprenticeship. You can't just walk in and say, I'd like to be a carpenter. any more than you could walk into a modern hospital and say, "I'd like to be a surgeon." The good news is that if you can find someone to vouch for you and take you into their household, you don't need money. You need skills and loyalty. And let's talk about those skills you think you have. You probably think you know about medicine because you've watched House and know that you should wash your hands. Congratulations! You're already ahead of 99% of medieval practitioners. But that knowledge is also incredibly dangerous. Suggesting that disease is caused by tiny invisible creatures rather than an imbalance of bodily humors or God's punishment for sin isn't just wrong according to medieval thinking. It's heretical. You're not just challenging medical practice, you're challenging the entire worldview that explains why bad things happen to people. Similarly, you might think you know about agriculture because you understand that plants need water, sunlight, and nutrients. But medieval farming isn't just about growing crops. It's about managing complex systems of land ownership, seasonal labor, and community obligations that have been developed over centuries of trial and error. You can't just show up and start giving farming advice without understanding the social context. Suggesting changes to agricultural practices isn't a technical discussion. It's challenging the way the entire community has organized itself. But you do have some genuine advantages, and we need to figure out how to use them without getting yourself killed. Your biggest advantage is literacy. Even if you're just average at reading and writing by modern standards, you're functionally a genius by medieval standards. Most people, including many nobles, are completely illiterate. Those who can read and write are typically clergy, and they're incredibly valuable to the community. Your second advantage is basic mathematical skills. You can probably do arithmetic that would stump educated medieval people. You understand concepts like percentages, averages, and basic geometry that won't be widely understood for centuries. Your third advantage is general knowledge. You know about geography, basic physics, and historical events that haven't happened yet but might be predictable based on patterns. You understand that cleanliness prevents disease, that certain foods prevent scurvy, and that boiling water makes it safer to drink. The trick is figuring out how to demonstrate these advantages without revealing that you're from the future. Let's start with the literacy. Father Benedict is going to be very interested in your ability to read and write, assuming you can convince him you have these skills. Medieval monasteries and churches always needed people who could copy manuscripts, keep records, and handle correspondence. But here's the catch. Medieval writing looks nothing like modern writing. The letters are different, the abbreviations are different, and the whole system of spelling and grammar is different. If you try to write something in modern English using modern letter forms, you're going to out yourself immediately. You need to convince Father Benedict to teach you their writing system while making it seem like you're remembering something you once knew rather than learning something completely new. This is where your supposed memory loss comes in handy. Act like you recognize letters but can't quite remember how to form them properly. Ask him to show you again, as if you're trying to recover a skill that was damaged by whatever traumatic experience brought you here. Once you can read and write in their system, you've got a ticket to medieval middle management. Scribes were valuable, respected, and relatively safe. They worked indoors, ate regularly, and were rarely the first people killed when things went bad. But before we get too comfortable with your new career as a medieval data entry clerk, we need to talk about the immediate problem of not starving to death, because medieval food makes airline food look like a Michelin-starred feast. I hope you like bread. Not good bread. Bread that tastes like it was made by someone who heard a description of bread once but never actually saw any. Bread made from grain that was probably moldy to begin with, mixed with water that definitely wasn't safe to drink, baked in ovens that were heated with whatever would burn, including, but not limited to, dried animal dung. Welcome to medieval cuisine, where every meal is an adventure and half the adventures end in diarrhea. The medieval diet consists of about 6 things: bread, ale, some kind of meat that might once have been an animal you'd recognize, vegetables that look like they've given up on life, dairy products that are actively trying to kill you, and hope. Let's start with the bread, because bread is literally the foundation of medieval nutrition. When medieval people talk about their daily bread, they're not being metaphorical. Bread provides about 70% of their daily calories. But this isn't the fluffy, processed bread you're used to. This is dense, dark, gritty bread that doubles as a construction material. Medieval bread contains things that modern health inspectors would classify as biological weapons. We're talking about grain that's been stored in conditions that would make a grain silo look sterile, often contaminated with ergot fungus that causes hallucinations, convulsions, and occasionally death. The process of making medieval bread involves techniques that haven't been updated since the Roman Empire fell, using equipment that's maintained about as well as medieval road. The ovens are communal, which means your bread is baked alongside everyone else's bread, along with whatever else they decided to throw in there. But here's the thing, you have to eat it. There's no alternative. Refusing to eat the bread marks you as either impossibly wealthy or completely insane, and since you're obviously not wealthy, everyone's going to assume you're insane. My advice, eat the bread slowly, chew thoroughly, and pray to whatever deity you believe in that your modern immune system can handle medieval bacteria. Now let's talk about ale, which is what medieval people drink instead of water, and for good reason. The water in medieval towns is basically a sewage delivery system that occasionally flows in the right direction. It's contaminated with everything that's ever lived, died, or been excreted in the local area. Ale, on the other hand, is relatively safe because the brewing process kills most of the dangerous bacteria. Medieval people don't understand the science behind this, but they've figured out through trial and error that people who drink ale get sick less often than people who drink water. Medieval ale is not beer as you know it. It's weak, flat. It tastes like someone dissolved bread in muddy water and then forgot about it for a week. But it won't kill you immediately, which makes it the premium beverage option. The meat situation is where things get really interesting. Medieval people eat meat when they can get it, which isn't often for most people. When they do get meat, it's usually preserved through salting, smoking, or drying, which means it's so salty it makes beef jerky taste subtle. Fresh meat is a luxury, and when it's available, it's eaten immediately because there's no refrigeration. This means that if you're lucky enough to get fresh meat, you're also lucky enough to get fresh meat at various stages of decomposition, depending on how long it's been since the animal died and how warm the weather is. Medieval people have developed an impressive tolerance for meat that's gone slightly off. What you would consider spoiled, they consider seasoned. What you would consider potentially lethal, they consider a normal Tuesday. Vegetables exist, technically. Medieval gardens produce things that are technically vegetables in the same way that a medieval road is technically a road. They're hardy, bitter, and nutritionally questionable, but they're available. The vegetables you're used to eating don't exist yet. No tomatoes, no potatoes, no peppers, no corn, no sugar, except honey if you're incredibly lucky. The vegetables that do exist taste like they've been personally insulted by the concept of flavor. Dairy products are where medieval cuisine really shows its commitment to making everything as dangerous as possible. Milk spoils almost immediately. Cheese is aged in conditions that would be considered unsanitary by medieval standards, which is saying something. And butter is sometimes food that's usually rancid by the time anyone gets to eat it. But people eat dairy anyway, because calories are calories and nutrition is a luxury that most people can't afford. Here's your survival strategy for medieval food. First, eat everything that's offered to you, even if it tastes like despair seasoned with regret. Refusing food is insulting to your host and marks you as someone who's too good for honest food, which is a dangerous reputation to have. Second, watch what the locals eat and how they eat it. If everyone else is carefully cutting around certain parts of the meat or avoiding specific vegetables, follow their lead. They've spent their lives learning what's safe and what isn't. Third, use your modern knowledge carefully. You know that boiling water makes it safer, but you can't explain germ theory to medieval people without sounding like a lunatic. Instead, suggest that hot water purifies things or that certain herbs have protective properties. Frame your knowledge in terms they can understand and accept. Fourth, prepare your digestive system for war. You're going to get sick. Not immediately, hopefully, but eventually your modern stomach is going to meet medieval bacteria, and it's not going to be a friendly meeting. Try to build up your tolerance gradually and hope that your immune system is stronger than your sense of taste. But surviving medieval food is just one part of staying alive. We also need to talk about where you're going to sleep, because medieval hospitality makes budget motels look like luxury resorts. So you've managed to communicate with Father Benedict, you've choked down some bread that tasted like cardboard mixed with disappointment, and now you need somewhere to sleep. In medieval times, accommodation comes in exactly 3 varieties: terrible, worse than terrible, and please just let me die in a ditch instead. Let's start with the best case scenario, the monastery guest house. Medieval monasteries practiced hospitality as a religious duty, which means they'll give you a place to sleep, even if they think you might be a demon in disguise. The good news is that monastery guest quarters are usually the cleanest, safest places you'll find in medieval society. The bad news is that clean by medieval monastery standards still involves sharing your sleeping space with rodents, insects, and at least 3 different kinds of fungus. The monastery bed is a wooden frame with rope stretched across it, topped with a thin mattress stuffed with straw. That straw has been there for months, possibly years, and it's home to every parasite that's ever been near the monastery. You're going to be sleeping on what amounts to a medieval apartment complex for fleas, lice, and things that haven't been discovered by science yet. But it beats the alternatives. If you can't get into the monastery, your next option is finding a place in someone's house. Medieval houses aren't designed for privacy or comfort. They're designed to keep the rain out and the heat in, and they barely succeed at either. A typical medieval house is one room where an entire family eats, sleeps, works, and conducts all their bodily functions. The floor is dirt, covered with rushes that are changed maybe twice a year if the family is particularly house-proud. These rushes absorb everything that falls on them: food scraps, bodily fluids, animal waste, and anything else that gravity delivers. The smell inside a medieval house is indescribable. Imagine a combination of unwashed humans, animal droppings, rotting food, wood smoke, and whatever died under the floorboards last winter and was never removed. Now imagine that smell concentrated in a space about the size of your living room, with no ventilation except a hole in the roof that also serves as the entrance for rain, snow, and birds. You'll be sleeping on the floor with everyone else, using your cloak as a blanket and your shoes as a pillow. The family dog, who is not a pet but a working animal, will probably try to sleep on top of you because you're warm and relatively clean. The family cat, who is definitely not a pet but a semi-feral creature that occasionally kills mice, will spend the night walking on your face. If you're really unlucky, you'll end up in a tavern or inn, which were medieval society's attempt at hospitality, combined with their complete lack of understanding about what makes people comfortable. Medieval taverns are businesses designed to extract money from travelers while providing the absolute minimum service necessary to avoid being shut down by local authorities. The beds are shared, not just shared between you and other travelers, but shared between you, other travelers, and whatever parasites they've brought from their last 3 stops. Medieval innkeepers operate on the principle that customers are temporary inconveniences who should pay as much as possible for services that barely qualify as services. The bed will be a straw mattress that's been used by dozens of previous guests, none of whom were particularly concerned about personal hygiene. You'll be sharing that bed with complete strangers who may or may not be criminals, merchants, pilgrims, or people fleeing various legal difficulties. Medieval taverns were where you went when you had nowhere else to go, which means your roommates are probably there for reasons that would make interesting but terrifying stories. The food at medieval taverns exists primarily to make you appreciate any other food you've ever eaten. It's prepared in kitchens that would be condemned by modern health authorities as biological warfare sites, served by people who consider washing their hands an optional luxury. But let's say you luck out and Father Benedict takes pity on you. Let's say he offers you a permanent place at the monastery in exchange for work. Congratulations, you've just become a medieval monk, which is either the best possible outcome or a lifetime sentence to medieval customer service. Medieval monasteries run on a schedule that makes military boot camp look relaxed. You'll wake up before dawn for morning prayers, work until evening prayers, eat 2 meals that make prison food look gourmet, and spend your free time copying manuscripts by candlelight while trying not to set yourself on fire. But monasteries are safe, stable, and they offer something incredibly rare in medieval society: predictability. You'll know where you're sleeping every night, what you'll be eating every day, and what's expected of you every hour. You'll also be part of an institution that owns land, has political connections, and commands respect throughout medieval society. Medieval monasteries were the Fortune 500 companies of their time, powerful, wealthy, and influential. The downside is that you've just taken vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience in a world where breaking those vows can result in excommunication, which is basically medieval social death. But maybe monastery life isn't for you. Maybe you want to try your luck in the wider medieval world, find work as a craftsman or merchant, build a life that doesn't involve getting up at 4 a.m. to sing Latin songs about how miserable life is. That's going to require understanding how medieval society actually functions. And spoiler alert, it functions badly, and for reasons that will make you question everything you thought you knew about human civilization. Okay, let's talk about medieval social media, except instead of LinkedIn profiles, people have reputations that follow them everywhere. And instead of getting unfriended, you get excommunicated or executed. Medieval society is built on a complex network of relationships, obligations, and reputation management that makes modern networking look simple. Everyone knows everyone owes someone something, and everyone is keeping track of who's up and who's down in the most elaborate social credit system ever devised. Here's how it works. Your social status determines everything about your life: where you can live, what you can eat, who you can marry, what work you can do, and whether people have to listen to you when you talk. And, unlike modern society, where you can theoretically change your status through hard work, education, or winning the lottery, medieval social status is fixed at birth and almost impossible to change. At the top, you've got the king, who supposedly gets his authority directly from God, and therefore doesn't have to explain his decisions to anyone except God, who is notably unavailable for comment most of the time. Below the king, you've got the great nobles, dukes, earls, counts, and other people with titles that sound impressive and land holdings that are measured in how many days it takes to ride across them. These people control vast territories, maintain private armies, and spend most of their time either fighting each other or planning to fight each other. Below them, you've got the lesser nobles, knights, barons, and local lords who control smaller territories and fewer soldiers, but still have the right to make other people's lives miserable. These are the middle management of feudalism, and like all middle management, they're usually the most unpleasant to deal with because they have just enough power to be dangerous, but not enough to be confident. Then you've got the merchants, artisans, and guildmasters, people who make things, sell things, or know how to make things work. These are the people who actually keep society running, but they're socially inferior to the nobles who spend most of their time hitting each other with swords. Below them, you've got the peasants, who make up about 90% of the population and do all the actual work that keeps everyone alive. Peasants are legally bound to the land they work on, which means they're not quite slaves, but they're not exactly free either. They can't leave without permission, they can't choose their own work, and they have to give a significant portion of everything they produce to their lord. And at the very bottom, you've got the outcasts, beggars, criminals, heretics, and people who've been kicked out of the system entirely. These people have no legal protections, no social connections, and no way to improve their situation legally. Now here's where it gets interesting for you. As a mysterious stranger with no family connections, no guild membership, and no lord to vouch for you, you're technically at the bottom of this system. You're an outcast by default, which means anyone can rob you, cheat you, or hurt you without consequences. But you also have something that medieval people value highly: mystery and potential divine favor. Medieval people lived in a world where saints performed miracles, angels appeared to deliver messages, and God regularly intervened in human affairs. A mysterious stranger with unusual knowledge and obviously superior health could be a messenger from God, a holy person in disguise, or someone blessed with divine favor. The trick is positioning yourself as mysteriously blessed rather than mysteriously cursed. This is where your modern knowledge becomes crucial, but you have to be incredibly careful about how you use it. Let's say you want to demonstrate that you have valuable skills. You can't just start talking about germ theory or advanced mathematics. That would mark you as either insane or heretical. Instead, you need to frame your knowledge in terms that medieval people can understand and accept. For example, you know that washing hands prevents disease, but you can't explain it by talking about bacteria. Instead, you suggest that cleanliness is pleasing to God and that dirty hands carry evil humors that cause sickness. You're using their framework to introduce your knowledge. You know that certain foods prevent scurvy, but you can't explain vitamins. Instead, you suggest that God has placed healing properties in certain plants, and that sailors who eat these plants are blessed with good health. You understand basic engineering principles, but you can't talk about physics. Instead, you suggest that certain proportions are more pleasing to God, and that structures built with these proportions are more likely to stand because they follow divine harmony. The key is to present yourself as someone who has received divine inspiration rather than someone who has scientific knowledge. Medieval people expect holy people to know things that ordinary people don't know, and they're prepared to accept that such knowledge might seem strange or unusual. But climbing the social ladder in medieval society isn't just about demonstrating knowledge. It's about finding a patron, someone with power and influence who's willing to vouch for you and protect you. This is where things get politically dangerous. Medieval politics is like a complex game of chess, except half the pieces are actively trying to kill the other half. The rules change every time someone powerful dies, and the board is on fire. Every noble is constantly maneuvering for advantage over every other noble. Every merchant is trying to gain exclusive access to profitable trade routes. Every craftsman is competing with every other craftsman for guild membership and customer loyalty. And everyone is watching everyone else for signs of weakness, opportunity, or treachery. As an outsider with no established loyalties, you're both an opportunity and a threat to everyone you meet. You could be a valuable ally who brings new skills and knowledge, or you could be a spy, a rival, or someone whose mere presence disrupts carefully balanced relationships. Your strategy needs to be finding someone who's secure enough in their position to take a risk on you, but not so powerful that associating with them automatically makes you enemies of everyone else. The monastery is actually a pretty good option for this, because monasteries are usually neutral in local political conflicts. Father Benedict has probably spent years carefully maintaining relationships with all the local power players without committing to any of them completely. But if you want to venture into the wider world, you need to understand how medieval business actually works, and spoiler alert, it doesn't work the way you think it works. Forget everything you know about free markets, supply and demand, and customer service. Medieval business operates on principles that would make modern economists weep and modern consumers form angry mobs. First, almost every trade is controlled by guilds, which are basically medieval labor unions, crossed with professional associations, crossed with organized crime families. Guilds control who can practice a trade, where they can practice it, how much they can charge, what quality standards they must meet, and who they can sell to. You can't just decide to become a blacksmith and start making horseshoes. You have to be accepted as an apprentice by an existing guild member, spend 7 years learning the trade while working for basically food and shelter, then spend several more years as a journeyman proving you can do the work. And finally, if the guild decides they need another master craftsman, and if you can afford the fees, you might be allowed to set up your own shop. And even then, you can only sell certain products at certain times to certain people at prices the guild has approved. This system exists for good reasons from a medieval perspective, It ensures quality control, prevents destructive price competition, maintains standards of training, and provides social security for guild members. But it also means that innovation is actively discouraged, prices are artificially high, and outsiders are systematically excluded. For you, this means that most traditional medieval careers are completely unavailable. You can't become a carpenter, a baker, a weaver, or a merchant without years of training and guild acceptance that you don't have time to pursue. But there are some opportunities available to skilled outsiders, especially if you can demonstrate abilities that existing guild members don't have. Let's talk about what you might actually be able to do to earn a living in medieval society. Scribe and record keeper. If you can master medieval writing, this is your best bet for immediate employment. Every lord, monastery, and large merchant needs someone who can keep records, write letters, and maintain accounts. The literacy rate in medieval society is so low that anyone who can read and write fluently is incredibly valuable. Your modern mathematical skills give you a huge advantage here. You understand concepts like double entry, bookkeeping, percentages, and statistical analysis that would seem like magic to medieval accountants. You can organize information in ways that make it more useful and accessible. The challenge is learning medieval writing systems and accounting practices quickly enough to be useful. Medieval numbers look different, medieval abbreviations are confusing, and medieval legal language is incomprehensible even to people who speak the language. Medical assistant. You can't practice medicine directly. That would require years of training in medieval medical theory, which is mostly wrong and often harmful. But you can work as an assistant to established practitioners while quietly introducing better practices. You know that cleanliness prevents infection, that certain herbs have genuine medicinal properties, and that many traditional remedies are actually helpful. You can frame this knowledge in terms that medieval practitioners can accept while gradually improving patient outcomes. Medieval medicine is so ineffective that even basic improvements in hygiene and wound care will seem miraculous. If you can demonstrate results without directly challenging established theories, you can build a reputation as someone blessed with healing abilities. Technical consultant. Medieval society has constant engineering challenges, building construction, water management, mechanical devices, and agricultural improvements. Your basic understanding of physics, mathematics, and engineering principles makes you incredibly valuable for solving these problems. You can't introduce advanced technology, but you can suggest improvements to existing techniques, better designs for water wheels, more efficient construction methods, improved agricultural tools. These are all within the realm of medieval possibility and would provide obvious benefits. Diplomatic translator. If you can learn multiple medieval languages, your modern linguistic skills make you valuable for diplomatic and commercial communication. Medieval Europe is a patchwork of different languages and dialects, and people who can facilitate communication between different groups are always in demand. Your modern understanding of geography, politics, and cultural differences gives you advantages in understanding how different societies relate to each other. You can serve as a cultural interpreter as well as a linguistic one. But whatever path you choose, you're going to need to understand medieval law, because medieval justice makes modern legal systems look fair, reasonable, and comprehensible. I hope you're not attached to concepts like innocent until proven guilty, right to a fair trial, or proportional punishment, because medieval justice operates on completely different principles that would make Kafka's nightmares seem reasonable and well organized. Medieval law isn't designed to determine truth or ensure fairness. It's designed to maintain social order, resolve conflicts quickly, and demonstrate the power of whoever's in charge. Justice is less about right and wrong, and more about who has more political influence and better connections. Let's start with how legal proceedings actually work in medieval society. If someone accuses you of a crime, you don't get a lawyer. You don't get to examine evidence. You don't get to call witnesses on your behalf. Instead, you get to choose between several options that all sound like they were designed by someone who actively hated the concept of justice. Trial by ordeal. This is where medieval society's commitment to letting God sort things out reaches its logical conclusion. The theory is that God will protect innocent people from harm and allow guilty people to suffer, so justice can be determined by subjecting the accused to various forms of controlled torture. Trial by hot iron involves grasping a red-hot piece of metal and carrying it a certain distance. If your hand heals cleanly within 3 days, you're innocent. If it becomes infected, which it almost certainly will because medieval understanding of wound care is approximately equivalent to medieval understanding of quantum physics, you're guilty. Trial by hot water involves reaching into a pot of boiling water to retrieve a stone. Again, clean healing means innocence, infection means guilt, and everyone involved pretends this makes perfect sense. Trial by cold water involves being tied up and thrown into water. If you float, you're guilty because the pure water rejects your sinful body. If you sink, you're innocent, but you might also be dead, which somewhat limits your ability to enjoy your vindication. Trial by combat. This is based on the theory that God will give strength to the righteous and allow the wicked to be defeated. You and your accuser, or champions representing both of you, fight until one is dead or surrenders. The winner is declared innocent, and the loser is declared guilty and usually executed. The obvious problem with this system is that combat skills have very little correlation with moral righteousness, but medieval society has decided to overlook this minor logical flaw: compurgation. This involves finding a certain number of people who are willing to swear that you're telling the truth. The number of oath helpers you need depends on your social status and the seriousness of the crime. This sounds more reasonable until you realize that the oath helpers aren't swearing that they know you're innocent. They're swearing that they believe your oath is truthful. And if it turns out you were lying, all of your oath helpers are also considered guilty of perjury and face the same punishment you do. This means that compurgation only works if you have enough friends who trust you completely and are willing to risk their lives on your honesty. For a mysterious stranger with no local connections, this option is basically unavailable. Trial by jury. This exists in some places and times, but medieval juries don't work like modern juries. Medieval jurors are expected to already know about the case and the people involved. They're not impartial observers weighing evidence. They're community members declaring what they believe based on local knowledge and personal relationships. Medieval juries also don't have to be unanimous. They don't have to explain their reasoning, and they can't be questioned about their decision. Once they've rendered a verdict, that's final, regardless of whether it makes any sense. Now let's talk about punishments, because medieval society approached criminal justice with a creativity and enthusiasm that would make horror movie writers take notes. For minor crimes, you might face fines, public humiliation, or brief imprisonment. Public humiliation typically involves being locked in stocks in the town square while people throw things at you, mock you, and generally treat you as entertainment. For more serious crimes, medieval society offers a wide range of punishments that demonstrate a remarkable commitment to making people suffer in creative ways. Theft might result in having your hand cut off, which serves both as punishment and as a permanent mark that warns everyone you meet that you're a convicted thief. Adultery might result in public shaming, imprisonment, or in some cases, death, depending on the social status of the people involved and the political implications of the case. Heresy, which includes pretty much any religious opinion that differs from whatever the local authorities consider orthodox, typically results in excommunication, exile, or being burned alive, depending on how seriously the authorities take the threat to social order. Treason, which is defined very broadly and can include anything from actual rebellion to insulting someone important, usually results in hanging, drawing, and quartering, which is exactly as horrible as it sounds. But here's the thing about medieval justice. It's not just arbitrary and cruel. It's also corrupt and political. Medieval judges aren't impartial arbiters of law. They're political appointees who serve at the pleasure of whoever appointed them. Their job isn't to ensure fair trials. It's to produce outcomes that serve the interests of their patrons. This means that your chances of receiving justice depend entirely on your political connections, your social status, and your ability to make your case in terms that serve the interests of powerful people. As a mysterious stranger with no local connections, you're at a significant disadvantage in any legal proceeding. You have no one to vouch for your character, no one to serve as oath helpers, and no political influence to protect you from arbitrary punishment. Your best strategy for dealing with medieval justice is avoiding it entirely. Stay out of conflicts, don't get involved in local disputes, and be very careful not to offend anyone who has the power to cause you legal problems. But even if you manage to avoid legal troubles, you still have to deal with the daily reality of medieval life, which involves health challenges that would make modern medical professionals weep with frustration and horror. Let's talk about medieval medicine, which is what happens when you combine ancient Greek theories that were wrong to begin with, religious beliefs that actively discourage scientific thinking, and a complete lack of understanding about how the human body actually works. Medieval medical theory is based on the idea that health depends on maintaining the proper balance of 4 bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Disease is caused by an imbalance of these humors, so treatment involves trying to restore balance through various methods that range from useless to actively harmful. The standard medieval medical toolkit includes bloodletting, purging, inducing vomiting, applying hot irons to various body parts, and administering herbal remedies that sometimes work by accident but usually don't work at all. Medieval physicians have received extensive training in medical theory that's almost entirely wrong. They can diagnose your humoral imbalance with confidence, prescribe treatments based on established medical principles, and explain exactly why their methods should work, even as their patients die from treatments that modern medicine would classify as torture. But here's the thing, medieval medicine isn't completely useless. Medieval practitioners have learned through centuries of trial and error that certain herbs have medicinal properties, that some surgical procedures can be helpful, and that certain treatments provide genuine relief for specific conditions. The problem is that they don't understand why these treatments work, so they can't distinguish between effective remedies and dangerous nonsense. A medieval physician might prescribe willow bark tea for pain relief, which actually works because it contains salicin, a precursor to aspirin, followed by bloodletting to balance your humors, which definitely doesn't work and might kill you. As a time traveler with modern medical knowledge, you have an enormous advantage. But you also have an enormous problem. You can't explain your knowledge in terms that medieval people will accept without sounding like a heretic or a lunatic. You know that disease is caused by microorganisms, but medieval people believe disease is caused by sin, divine punishment, bad air, or humoral imbalance. You know that cleanliness prevents infection, but medieval people think that washing too much is unhealthy and possibly immoral. You know that certain foods prevent nutritional deficiencies, that boiling water kills dangerous bacteria, and that many traditional remedies are actually harmful. But explaining any of this requires introducing concepts that won't be discovered for centuries. Your strategy has to be introducing better practices without challenging fundamental beliefs about how the body works. Let's say you're helping treat someone with a wound. You can't explain germ theory, but you can suggest that cleanliness is pleasing to God and that dirty bandages carry evil influences that slow healing. You can recommend washing wounds with boiled water, claiming that the heat purifies the water and drives out harmful spirits. You can suggest using certain herbs that you know have antiseptic properties, explaining that God has placed healing virtues in these plants. You can recommend keeping wounds covered and changing bandages frequently, arguing that exposure to corrupted air slows the healing process. Medieval people are used to the idea that holy people and wise healers have special knowledge about healing. If you can demonstrate consistently better results while framing your methods in terms they can understand, you can build a reputation as someone blessed with healing abilities. But medical knowledge is only part of staying healthy in medieval times. You also have to deal with the daily health hazards of medieval life, which include things that modern people never have to worry about. Water quality. Medieval water sources are contaminated with everything that's ever lived, died, or been excreted in the local area. Drinking water without boiling it first is basically playing Russian roulette with cholera, dysentery, and parasites that haven't been discovered yet. You need to find ways to always drink boiled water without explaining why. Suggest that hot drinks are better for the digestion, that warming water makes it more compatible with the body's natural heat, or that boiling purifies water spiritually as well as physically. Food safety. Medieval food preservation methods are unreliable at best and dangerous at worst. Meat is often partially spoiled, dairy products are contaminated with harmful bacteria, and preserved foods contain levels of salt that would make a modern cardiologist faint. You need to learn to recognize the signs of food spoilage that medieval people ignore or consider normal. Avoid meat that smells off, dairy products that look suspicious, and anything that's been stored under conditions that would violate modern health codes. Parasite prevention. Medieval people live in close contact with animals, use human waste as fertilizer, and have minimal understanding of parasite life cycles. Intestinal worms, fleas, lice, and other parasites are so common that they're considered a normal part of life. You can reduce your parasite load by washing frequently, in private, so people don't think you're obsessed with cleanliness, avoiding raw meat, and being very careful about what you eat and where you eat it. Injury prevention. Medieval life is full of opportunities to hurt yourself in ways that would be easily treatable with modern medicine, but potentially fatal with medieval medical care. A simple cut can become infected and kill you if you don't know how to care for it properly. Be extremely careful around medieval tools, weapons, and work environments. Medieval safety standards are non-existent, and workplace injuries are just considered part of the job. Dental care. Medieval dental hygiene makes modern dental care look like advanced alien technology. People rarely brush their teeth, dental problems are incredibly common, and tooth extraction is the only treatment available for serious dental issues. You can maintain better dental health by cleaning your teeth with cloths, using salt as an abrasive, and avoiding the worst medieval foods. But you can't explain modern dental theory without sounding insane. The good news is that if you can stay healthy while medieval people around you are getting sick, people will notice. Exceptional health in medieval times is seen as a sign of divine favor, and that reputation can be incredibly valuable for building social connections and political influence. But even if you master medieval medicine and avoid the worst health hazards, you still have to deal with the fundamental challenge of medieval life. It's boring, uncomfortable, and offers very few of the conveniences that make modern life tolerable. Let's talk about what your typical day looks like in medieval times. And spoiler alert, it's going to make you nostalgic for Monday mornings at your most boring job. Medieval people wake up when the sun rises, not because they're committed to healthy living, but because candles are expensive, firelight is dangerous, and there's literally nothing else to do in the dark. Artificial lighting in medieval times consists of candles made from animal fat, oil lamps that smell terrible and provide minimal light, and fires that are constantly threatening to burn down the entire building. You wake up on your pile of straw that you share with several other people, various animals, and insects that consider you a mobile food source. The room is cold because medieval heating consists of a central fire that provides warmth to whoever's closest to it, and hypothermia to everyone else. You get dressed in clothes that you've been wearing for weeks, because washing clothes is a major undertaking that involves hauling water, heating it over a fire, and spending an entire day on laundry. Medieval people own very few clothes and wear them until they literally fall apart. Personal hygiene in medieval times is a subject that modern people can't comprehend without experiencing psychological trauma. Medieval people don't bathe regularly, not because they enjoy being dirty, but because bathing is difficult, expensive, and potentially dangerous. Medieval baths require hauling enormous amounts of water, heating it over a fire, and finding somewhere private enough to bathe without attracting unwanted attention. Public bathhouses exist in some places, but they're expensive, often associated with prostitution, and not particularly clean by modern standards. Most medieval people clean themselves by wiping down with damp cloths, changing their undergarments when possible, and hoping for the best. Deodorant doesn't exist, toothpaste doesn't exist, and the concept of daily personal hygiene is completely foreign. You start your day with breakfast, which consists of bread, ale, and possibly some leftover food from the previous day if you're lucky. Medieval people eat 2 main meals per day, a light breakfast and a larger dinner in the late afternoon. Lunch isn't a thing yet. Then you go to work, which probably involves manual labor that would be illegal under modern workplace safety regulations. Medieval work is physically demanding, dangerous, and monotonous. You'll spend 12 to 14 hours per day doing repetitive tasks under conditions that would make modern labor unions form angry mobs. If you're working in agriculture, you'll spend your day plowing fields with tools that haven't been improved since the Roman Empire, planting crops by hand, and harvesting grain with hand tools, while hoping that the weather, insects, and local wildlife don't destroy everything you've worked for. If you're working in a craft trade, you'll spend your day in a workshop that's poorly lit, badly ventilated, and filled with tools and materials that are actively trying to injure you. Medieval workshops are cramped, noisy, and dangerous places where workplace injuries are considered normal occupational hazards. If you're working as a servant or laborer, you'll spend your day doing whatever physical work needs to be done, which might involve hauling water, cleaning floors by hand, moving heavy objects without mechanical assistance, or maintaining fires that are essential for heating and cooking. Medieval work doesn't include coffee breaks, lunch hours, weekend time off, or vacation days. You work when there's work to be done, which is most of the time, and you rest when there isn't, which isn't often. Entertainment in medieval times consists of activities that modern people would consider either childish or disturbing. Popular entertainment includes watching public executions, attending religious services that last for hours, listening to traveling musicians who know about 12 songs, and participating in community festivals that celebrate whatever saint is responsible for protecting the local crops. Medieval games include various forms of gambling with dice or cards, physical contests that often result in serious injuries, and drinking contests that definitely result in serious injuries. Sports exist, but they're violent, unregulated, and often serve as training for actual combat. Reading for pleasure is not an option for most people, both because books are incredibly expensive and because most people can't read. Books are hand-copied manuscripts that cost more than most people earn in a year, and they're usually religious texts rather than entertainment. Privacy doesn't exist in medieval society. You sleep in the same room as other people, you work alongside other people all day, and you conduct most of your business in public spaces where everyone can see and hear everything you do. Personal space is not a recognized concept. Medieval people stand closer together, touch each other more frequently, and generally interact in ways that would make modern people deeply uncomfortable. This isn't because they're more affectionate, it's because private space is a luxury that most people can't afford. Quiet is also not a thing in medieval times. Medieval environments are constantly noisy with the sounds of people working, animals making noise, tools being used, and general activity that never stops. The idea of having a quiet space for concentration or relaxation is completely foreign. Medieval people go to bed when the sun sets, not because they're tired, but because there's nothing else to do in the dark. Evening activities are limited to sitting around fires, telling stories, playing simple games, or engaging in whatever passes for conversation when most people have never traveled more than 20 miles from where they were born. This daily routine repeats every day, with minor variations based on the season, local festivals, and whether or not there's a war going on nearby. Medieval people don't take vacations, don't have hobbies in the modern sense, and don't generally expect life to be entertaining or comfortable. The concept of personal fulfillment, following your dreams, or finding work that you enjoy is completely alien to medieval thinking. You do whatever work you're assigned to do, you marry whoever your family arranges for you to marry, and you live whatever life circumstances have given you. This might sound depressing from a modern perspective, but medieval people don't expect life to be enjoyable in the way modern people do. They expect life to be hard, uncomfortable, and often unpleasant, and they find meaning through religious faith, family relationships, and community connections, rather than through personal achievement or individual satisfaction. But even this harsh daily routine can be interrupted by events that make normal medieval life look pleasant and comfortable by comparison. Let's talk about what happens when medieval society really starts to break down. I hope you're not emotionally attached to concepts like stable food supply, predictable weather, or not dying horribly from diseases that modern medicine eliminated decades ago, because medieval life is punctuated by catastrophes that make modern disasters look like minor inconveniences. Let's start with famine, which is what happens when medieval agriculture meets reality and reality wins decisively. Medieval farming is basically gambling with the weather, the soil, and whatever supernatural forces are responsible for crop success. There's no scientific understanding of soil management, no reliable weather prediction, no effective pest control, and no backup plans for when things go wrong. A single bad harvest can trigger a famine that lasts for years and kills significant percentages of the population. And bad harvests happen regularly, about once every 7 to 10 years on average, because medieval farming methods are inefficient, unreliable, and completely dependent on factors that medieval people can't control or predict. During a famine, food becomes more valuable than gold, and people will do absolutely anything to get it. Social order breaks down, crime rates skyrocket, and moral standards become flexible in ways that would shock modern people. Medieval people during famines eat things that modern people would consider inedible: tree bark, grass, leather, and anything else that might provide calories. They abandon children they can't feed, sell family members into slavery, and resort to cannibalism when all other options are exhausted. If you're caught in a medieval famine, your modern knowledge of nutrition and food safety becomes incredibly valuable, but it also becomes incredibly dangerous. Knowing which plants are edible, how to preserve food more effectively, or where to find alternative food sources could save lives, but it could also mark you as someone with supernatural knowledge. Your best strategy during a famine is to use your knowledge carefully and quietly. Help people when you can, but don't draw attention to your unusual abilities. Share information in ways that seem like lucky guesses rather than expert knowledge. Then there's plague, which is what happens when medieval understanding of disease meets infectious agents that don't care about medieval medical theory. Medieval people have no understanding of how diseases spread, no effective treatments for serious illnesses, and no way to prevent epidemics once they start. When plague arrives in a medieval community, it typically kills between 1/3 and 1/2 of the population before burning itself out. Medieval responses to plague include praying harder, blaming religious minorities, implementing quarantine measures that don't work because they don't understand how disease transmission works, and trying various medical treatments that usually make things worse. Your modern understanding of disease transmission gives you enormous advantages during a plague outbreak, but you have to be incredibly careful about how you use that knowledge. You know that isolation prevents spread, that cleanliness reduces infection rates, and that certain basic medical practices can improve survival rates. But you can't explain germ theory without sounding insane. Instead, you have to frame your knowledge in terms that medieval people can accept. Suggest that disease spreads through corrupted air, and that covering your face prevents breathing it in. Recommend cleanliness as a way to avoid divine punishment for uncleanness. Propose isolation as a way to prevent evil influences from spreading. War is another regular feature of medieval life, and medieval warfare is nothing like the romantic battles depicted in movies and books. Medieval war is brutal, chaotic, and primarily involves armed groups of men terrorizing unarmed civilians. Medieval armies are undisciplined collections of violent people who are paid primarily through looting whatever territory they're passing through. Even if you're technically on the winning side, armies are dangerous to everyone in their path. During wartime, normal legal protections disappear. Soldiers take whatever they want, kill anyone who resists, and generally treat civilian populations as resources to be exploited rather than people to be protected. If war reaches your area, your survival depends on making yourself useful to whoever's in charge without becoming a target for their enemies. Your best bet is probably hiding in a monastery or other religious institution, because churches are sometimes considered neutral territory and armies sometimes respect religious sanctuary. But perhaps the most psychologically challenging aspect of medieval disasters is that there's no external help coming. There's no government disaster relief, no international aid organizations, and no emergency services. When things go wrong in medieval times, communities are entirely on their own. Modern people are used to the idea that someone will come to help during disasters. Emergency responders, government agencies, charitable organizations, or international relief efforts. Medieval people know that when disaster strikes, their only help comes from their immediate community. And if the entire community is affected, there's no help at all. This means that social relationships become incredibly important during disasters. The people who survive medieval catastrophes are usually the ones who have strong community connections, valuable skills, and the ability to work cooperatively with others under extreme stress. Your modern skills could make you incredibly valuable during disasters, but only if you can contribute to community survival efforts without appearing threatening or supernatural. You want to be seen as someone blessed with useful knowledge rather than someone who knows things that are impossible for normal people to know. But disasters are just extreme examples of the general uncertainty that characterizes all medieval life. Medieval people live with constant awareness that everything they depend on could disappear without warning, and there's very little they can do to prevent it. This uncertainty shapes medieval attitudes toward risk, planning, and the future in ways that are difficult for modern people to understand. Let's talk about how medieval people think about life, death, and what it means to be human in a world where nothing is predictable except that most things will go badly. Understanding medieval psychology is crucial for your survival, because medieval people don't just live differently from modern people, they think differently. Their entire mental framework is based on assumptions about reality that are fundamentally different from modern assumptions. Medieval people expect life to be hard, uncomfortable, and often unfair. This isn't pessimism, it's realism based on centuries of experience. Medieval life is genuinely difficult in ways that modern people can barely imagine, and medieval people have developed mental strategies for coping with constant hardship. First, medieval people don't believe in progress the way modern people do. Modern people generally assume that life gets better over time, that technology improves, knowledge advances, and future generations will live better than past generations. Medieval people assume that life gets worse over time. They believe they're living in a fallen world that's gradually declining from a perfect beginning toward an inevitable end. The best times are in the past, the present is worse than the past, and the future will be worse than the present. This means that medieval people don't expect improvements in their living conditions, don't plan for social advancement, and don't generally believe that hard work will lead to better circumstances. They work hard because they have to, not because they expect it to improve their lives. Second, medieval people believe that most of what happens to them is determined by factors beyond their control. Divine will, fate, luck, and supernatural forces are much more important than individual effort or planning. This doesn't mean medieval people are passive or fatalistic. They work hard and make plans, but they don't expect to have much control over outcomes. A good harvest depends more on God's favor than on farming techniques. Success in business depends more on luck than on skill. Surviving an illness depends more on divine intervention than on medical treatment. This attitude makes medieval people more accepting of hardship than modern people would be. But it also makes them less likely to invest effort in long-term improvement projects. Why build better roads if God controls whether travelers arrive safely? Why develop new farming techniques if crop success depends on divine will? Third, medieval people live in a world that's full of supernatural activity. Angels, demons, saints, spirits, and magical forces are constantly influencing human affairs. Miraculous healings, prophetic dreams, divine punishments, and supernatural interventions are regular parts of daily life. This means that medieval people expect to encounter things that can't be explained through natural causes. Strange events, unusual coincidences, and impossible occurrences are evidence of supernatural activity rather than problems to be solved through investigation. Your sudden appearance with unusual knowledge and strange clothes fits perfectly into this worldview. Medieval people don't need scientific explanations for why you're there. They need to figure out what supernatural forces are responsible for your presence, and whether those forces are good or evil. Fourth, medieval people have very different ideas about individual identity and personal autonomy than modern people do. Medieval identity is primarily collective rather than individual. You're defined by your family, your community, your social role, and your relationship to God, rather than by your personal characteristics or achievements. Medieval people don't expect to choose their own careers, select their own spouses, or determine their own life paths. These decisions are made by families, communities, and social superiors, based on collective needs rather than individual preferences. This means that medieval people are less likely to be bothered by situations that modern people would find intolerable. Living with extended family, working in jobs you don't enjoy, and accepting arranged marriages aren't seen as restrictions on personal freedom. They're seen as normal parts of fulfilling your social obligations. Fifth, medieval people have much shorter time horizons than modern people. Medieval life is precarious enough that long-term planning is often pointless. People focus on immediate survival and short-term goals rather than career development or retirement planning. Medieval people don't generally expect to live as long as modern people. Don't assume they'll have opportunities for advancement, and don't invest much effort in preparing for futures that might never arrive. This makes them more focused on present relationships and immediate needs. Understanding these attitudes is crucial for fitting into medieval society without attracting unwanted attention. You need to adjust your expectations, modify your behavior, and frame your goals in ways that make sense to medieval people. Don't talk about long-term plans or social improvement projects. Don't express frustration with inefficient systems or unfair social arrangements. Don't suggest that individuals should have more control over their own lives or that society could be organized more rationally. Instead, frame your suggestions in terms of divine will, traditional wisdom, and community benefit. Present innovations as recovering lost knowledge rather than developing new ideas. Suggest that improvements are ways of better fulfilling existing obligations rather than changing the system. Accept that medieval people will interpret your actions and suggestions through their own mental framework, and work within that framework rather than trying to change it. Now, you're not going to convert medieval people to modern thinking, but you can present modern ideas in ways that medieval people can accept and use. But even if you master medieval psychology and successfully integrate into medieval society, you're still going to face the fundamental challenge of medieval life. Most people die young, painfully, and without accomplishing much of what they hope to accomplish. Let's talk about death in medieval times, which is a subject that medieval people think about constantly because death is always close at hand. Let's talk about death in medieval times, which is a conversation topic that medieval people are surprisingly comfortable with because death is basically their annoying neighbor who drops by uninvited about 3 times more often than you'd like. Medieval people don't live very long. Average life expectancy is somewhere between 25 and 35 years, depending on when and where you are, but those numbers are misleading because they include massive infant mortality rates. If you survive childhood, which is a pretty big if, you might live to 50 or 60, but you're going to spend most of those years feeling much older than your actual age. Medieval people die from things that modern medicine considers minor inconveniences. A small cut becomes infected and kills you. Diarrhea leads to dehydration and death. A broken bone doesn't heal properly and results in permanent disability or fatal complications. Tooth infections spread to the brain and cause death. Childbirth is basically Russian roulette for women. Maternal mortality rates are astronomical, and every pregnancy is potentially fatal. Women who survive multiple childbirths are considered blessed by God, because statistically speaking, they should be dead. Children die so frequently that medieval parents don't usually name their babies until they're sure the child is going to survive infancy. Many families lose half or more of their children before they reach adulthood, and this is considered normal rather than tragic. Medieval people have developed cultural practices around death that help them cope with constant mortality. Death is treated as a natural part of life, rather than a medical failure or a tragedy to be prevented at all costs. Medieval funerals are community events that serve multiple social functions. They're opportunities for families to demonstrate their social status, for communities to reaffirm their religious beliefs, and for everyone to acknowledge that death could come for anyone at any time. Medieval people prepare for death throughout their lives. They write wills, arrange for prayers to be said for their souls, and maintain relationships with religious institutions that will help them achieve salvation. Death isn't something that happens to other people. It's something that everyone expects to experience personally and soon. This constant awareness of mortality affects every aspect of medieval life. People focus on spiritual preparation rather than material accumulation. They invest in relationships that will benefit their souls rather than careers that will benefit their bank accounts. Medieval people also believe that death is just a transition to eternal life rather than the end of existence. This makes death less terrifying, but also less urgent to prevent. Medieval medical practice focuses more on helping people die well than on keeping them alive at all costs. Your modern knowledge about disease prevention, basic medical care, and health maintenance could help you live significantly longer than most medieval people, but you have to be careful about drawing attention to your unusual longevity. If you consistently avoid diseases that kill other people, if you maintain better health than people around you, and if you live significantly longer than average, people are going to notice. Exceptional longevity in medieval times is seen as evidence of divine favor, supernatural protection, or possibly diabolic assistance. You want to be healthier than average, but not impossibly healthy. You want to avoid the worst medieval diseases, but not all medieval diseases. You want to live longer than most people, but not so much longer that people start asking uncomfortable questions about why God is protecting you specifically. The good news is that even modest improvements in health and longevity will seem remarkable by medieval standards. If you can live to 60 in good health, you'll be considered blessed. If you can maintain your teeth, avoid major diseases, and stay physically capable into old age, you'll be regarded as someone with supernatural favor. But medieval death isn't just about disease and old age. Medieval society offers numerous opportunities to die violently, suddenly, and in ways that would make modern safety regulators pass out from shock. Medieval work is incredibly dangerous. Farming involves tools that can easily kill you if you make a mistake. Construction work is done without safety equipment, fall protection, or basic accident prevention. Metalworking involves molten metal, open flames, and toxic fumes in poorly ventilated spaces. Medieval transportation is also lethal. Horses are large, powerful animals that can kill you accidentally or deliberately. Medieval roads are poorly maintained, inadequately marked, and full of hazards that can cause fatal accidents. River crossings involve boats that sink regularly and ferries that operate without safety equipment. Medieval food and water can kill you through poisoning, contamination, or allergic reactions that can't be treated effectively. Medieval buildings can collapse, burn down, or simply fall apart without warning. Medieval weather can kill you through exposure, flooding, or storms that destroy entire communities. But perhaps most dangerous of all is medieval society itself. Medieval people are armed, often drunk, frequently angry, and not particularly concerned about using violence to solve problems. Medieval conflicts escalate quickly from arguments to physical confrontations to lethal violence. Medieval people carry weapons as a matter of course, and they're prepared to use them over disputes that modern people would resolve through lawsuits or strongly worded letters. Medieval law enforcement is minimal and often corrupt. There's no police force in the modern sense, no emergency medical services, and no systematic investigation of violent crimes. If someone kills you in medieval times, there's a good chance they'll never face any consequences for it. Your best strategy for avoiding violent death is avoiding violent people, which is easier said than done in a society where most people are armed and many people are desperate. Stay away from taverns late at night, when drunk people with weapons are looking for entertainment. Avoid getting involved in local disputes, even if you think you could help resolve them. Don't travel alone if you can avoid it, and when you do travel, don't carry anything valuable enough to make robbing you worthwhile. Most importantly, don't challenge medieval social hierarchies or customs, even when they seem obviously wrong or unfair. Medieval people will kill you for disrespecting their social superiors, insulting their religious beliefs, or threatening their economic interests. But assuming you can avoid violent death, disease, accidents, and starvation, you still have to deal with the psychological challenge of living in a world where everyone you care about is probably going to die before you do. Medieval people form strong emotional attachments despite knowing that death will separate them from the people they love. They develop relationships, raise families, and build communities while accepting that all of these connections are temporary. This requires a kind of emotional resilience that modern people rarely develop, because modern people don't usually have to cope with constant loss. Medieval people learn to grieve quickly, form new attachments, and continue functioning despite repeated emotional trauma. You're going to have to develop similar emotional strategies if you want to maintain your sanity in medieval times. You'll form friendships with people who die from diseases you could prevent, if you could explain modern medical knowledge. You'll watch children die from conditions that modern medicine treats routinely. You'll see communities destroyed by disasters that modern technology could predict and prevent. This is probably the hardest part of living in medieval times for someone with modern sensibilities. It's not just that life is uncomfortable or inconvenient, it's that life is genuinely tragic in ways that modern people are protected from experiencing. But medieval people don't see their lives as tragic. They see them as meaningful despite being brief, valuable despite being difficult, and worth living despite being painful. Medieval people find purpose through religious faith, family relationships, and community connections that transcend individual mortality. You'll need to find similar sources of meaning if you want to build a satisfying life in medieval times. You can't judge medieval life by modern standards. You can't expect medieval society to provide the kinds of fulfillment that modern people take for granted. Instead, you'll need to appreciate medieval life on its own terms, find value in medieval relationships and activities, and accept that a good life in medieval times looks very different from a good life in modern times. But before we get too philosophical about the meaning of medieval existence, let's talk about some practical skills that will help you not just survive medieval times, but actually prosper in them. All right, so you've survived your first few weeks in medieval times. You haven't been burned as a witch, executed as a spy, or died from eating something that was technically food, but probably shouldn't have been. Congratulations, you're already beating the odds. Now let's talk about how to move beyond basic survival and actually build a successful life in medieval society. This requires mastering skills that go beyond just not dying. You need to become valuable enough that medieval people want to keep you around and protect you. Becoming a medieval influencer without social media. Medieval society runs on reputation and relationships, which makes it surprisingly similar to modern social media, except that getting canceled often involves actual cancellation of your existence. Your goal is to build a reputation as someone who's useful, trustworthy, and blessed with good fortune. Start by identifying the most influential people in your community and figuring out what they need. Medieval power brokers are usually facing problems that your modern knowledge can help solve, but you have to present solutions in ways that don't threaten their authority or contradict their worldview. For example, maybe the local lord is struggling with agricultural productivity on his lands. You can't introduce modern farming techniques directly, but you can suggest improvements to existing practices that happen to align with better agricultural science. Frame crop rotation is following God's design for natural cycles. Present soil improvement is recovering ancient wisdom that's been forgotten. The key is making powerful people look smart for accepting your suggestions rather than making them look ignorant for not having thought of your ideas themselves. Medieval politics is all about face-saving and status preservation. Mastering medieval communication. Medieval society is an oral culture where information spreads through personal relationships rather than written records. This means that your ability to communicate effectively determines how successful you can become. Learn to tell stories. Medieval people love stories, and someone who can tell engaging stories about distant lands, historical events, or moral lessons will always find an audience. Use your modern knowledge of history and geography to create traveler's tales that entertain people while subtly introducing useful information. Develop your memory skills. Medieval people with good memories are incredibly valuable because they can serve as living libraries, storing and retrieving information that would otherwise be lost. Practice memorizing important information, legal precedents, genealogies, and technical knowledge that communities need to preserve. Learn multiple languages. Medieval Europe is a patchwork of different languages and dialects, and people who can translate between them are always in demand. Your modern language skills give you a foundation for learning medieval languages more quickly than someone starting from scratch. Becoming indispensable through technical skills. Your modern knowledge of mathematics, engineering, and basic science makes you potentially valuable for solving technical problems that medieval communities face regularly. The trick is applying this knowledge without revealing its true source. For example, maybe the local mill isn't working efficiently. You can't explain mechanical engineering principles, but you can suggest adjustments that improve the mill's performance while claiming you learned these techniques from a master craftsman in a distant land. Maybe the community is having problems with their water supply. You can't explain hydrology, but you can suggest improvements to their water management system, while framing your knowledge as traditional wisdom from regions where water management is more advanced. Medieval communities always need help with construction projects, agricultural improvements, and mechanical problems. Your basic understanding of physics and engineering makes you incredibly valuable for these projects, as long as you can present your knowledge in ways that don't seem impossible or heretical. Building economic security. Medieval economic security comes from having multiple sources of support rather than depending on a single employer or income stream. You want to build relationships with different groups that all have reasons to protect and support you. Develop relationships with religious institutions. Medieval monasteries and churches are the most stable institutions in medieval society, and they always need people with literacy and administrative skills. Even if you don't become a monk, you can serve as a scribe, accountant, or advisor. Cultivate connections with merchant networks. Medieval merchants travel widely and need people who understand different languages, currencies, and regional customs. Your modern knowledge of geography and trade makes you valuable for planning trade routes and understanding market conditions. Build ties with craft guilds. Even if you can't become a master craftsman, you can serve as a technical consultant, record keeper, or intermediary between different trades. Medieval craft production involves coordination between multiple specialists, and someone who understands the entire process is very useful. Establish relationships with noble households. Medieval nobles need administrators, advisors, and specialists who can help them manage their lands and political relationships. Your literacy and analytical skills make you valuable for these roles. Managing medieval politics. Medieval politics is incredibly complex because it involves multiple overlapping systems of authority, loyalty, and obligation. Everyone owes allegiance to multiple different authorities, and these loyalties often conflict with each other. Your strategy should be becoming useful to multiple factions without committing exclusively to any single group. You want to be valuable enough that different groups compete for your services rather than fighting over whether you're loyal to them. Stay informed about local political relationships. Understand who's allied with whom, who's feuding with whom, and how these relationships affect daily life in your community. This information helps you avoid accidentally getting caught in political conflicts. Remain religiously orthodox. Medieval society has very little tolerance for religious deviation, and accusations of heresy can destroy your reputation instantly. Attend religious services regularly, participate in community religious activities, and avoid expressing any opinions that could be interpreted as challenging church doctrine. Avoid taking sides in factional disputes. Medieval communities are full of ongoing conflicts between different families, guilds, and social groups. Your best strategy is remaining neutral and offering services to all sides rather than becoming identified with particular factions. Creating long-term security. Medieval life is unpredictable, so you need to build resilience against the various disasters that regularly destroy medieval communities. This means developing multiple skills, maintaining diverse relationships, and creating backup plans for when things go wrong. Learn practical skills that are useful in any community. Basic medical knowledge, literacy, mathematical skills, and technical expertise will make you valuable wherever you end up if you have to leave your current location. Build a network of relationships that extends beyond your immediate community. Medieval society is built on personal connections, and having allies in different locations provides security if you need to relocate. Accumulate portable wealth. Medieval wealth is usually tied to land ownership, but as an outsider, you're unlikely to acquire significant land holdings. Instead, focus on accumulating skills, knowledge, and relationships that you can take with you anywhere. Maintain your health and physical capabilities. Medieval life is physically demanding, and people who can't perform physical labor have very limited options for supporting themselves. Stay in good physical condition, and avoid injuries that could limit your ability to work. But even if you master all these skills and build a successful medieval life, you're still going to face a fundamental question. Do you want to stay in medieval times permanently, or do you want to find a way back to your own time? Let's talk about that choice, because it's more complicated than you might think. Here's where things get psychologically complex, because after you've been in medieval times for a few months or years, you're going to face a decision that no time travel movie ever adequately explores. Do you really want to go back to modern times? I know that sounds crazy. Medieval life is uncomfortable, dangerous, and offers very few of the conveniences that make modern life enjoyable. But medieval life also offers things that modern life doesn't, and some of those things might be more valuable than you initially realize. The case for staying medieval communities provide a level of social connection that's almost impossible to achieve in modern society. Everyone knows everyone depends on everyone else, and individual identity is deeply connected to community membership. In medieval times, you're not just a consumer or an employee, you're an essential part of a community that couldn't function without your contribution. Your work directly benefits people you know personally, and their work directly benefits you. This creates a sense of purpose and belonging that many modern people struggle to find. Medieval life also operates at a human scale that can be deeply satisfying. You can understand how your entire community works, you can see the direct results of your efforts, and you can develop mastery over skills that produce tangible, useful results. Medieval people also have a kind of psychological resilience that modern people often lack. They're used to dealing with hardship, uncertainty, and loss, which means they're often happier and more satisfied with simple pleasures than modern people who expect constant comfort and entertainment. If you've successfully integrated into medieval society, you've probably developed relationships, responsibilities, and a social identity that would be difficult to replicate in modern times. Leaving medieval times means abandoning everything you built and starting over in a world that might feel alien after years of medieval life. The case for going home. On the other hand, modern life offers opportunities for personal development, individual expression, and physical comfort that medieval life simply can't match. Modern medicine, education, technology, and social freedoms represent genuine improvements over medieval alternatives. Modern life expectancy is roughly double medieval life expectancy, and those extra years are generally healthier and more comfortable. Modern medical care can prevent or treat conditions that would be fatal in medieval times. Modern society also offers opportunities for women, minorities, and people from non-elite backgrounds that simply don't exist in medieval times. If you're anyone other than a white male from a privileged family, medieval society is going to limit your options in ways that modern society doesn't. Modern education, travel, and communication technologies provide access to knowledge, experiences, and relationships that medieval people can't even imagine. The intellectual and cultural opportunities available in modern times far exceed anything available in medieval society. The practical challenges of each choice. If you decide to stay in medieval times, you need to accept that you'll never again have access to modern medicine, technology, or social systems. You'll watch people die from diseases you know how to prevent, but you won't be able to help them without revealing knowledge that could get you killed. You'll also have to accept that your modern values and expectations will constantly conflict with medieval social norms. Medieval society is hierarchical, authoritarian, and deeply unfair by modern standards, and you'll have to participate in systems that violate your modern sense of justice and equality. If you decide to try to return to modern times, you face the challenge of figuring out how time travel works and whether it's something you can control or influence. Most time travel scenarios involve either random chance or specific conditions that might not be repeatable. You also have to consider whether returning to modern times is even possible. Time travel might be a one-way process, or the mechanism that brought you to medieval times might no longer exist. Building multiple scenarios. So your best strategy is probably preparing for multiple possibilities while keeping your options open. Build a successful medieval life that you could be satisfied with permanently, while also gathering information and resources that might help you return to modern times if the opportunity arises. This means becoming valuable enough to medieval society that you have security and status, while also maintaining the knowledge and skills that define your modern identity. You want to integrate into medieval culture without losing your modern perspective. It also means staying alert for unusual events, strange phenomena, or technological discoveries that might be related to whatever brought you to medieval times. Time travel might involve specific locations, astronomical events, or conditions that could be predicted or recreated. The information dilemma. One of the most challenging aspects of long-term medieval life is deciding how much modern knowledge to share and how to share it responsibly. You could potentially introduce innovations that would improve medieval life dramatically. Better medical practices, more efficient agriculture, improved engineering techniques, and scientific knowledge that could advance human progress by centuries. But introducing modern knowledge also carries enormous risks. Rapid social change could destabilize medieval society and cause conflicts that kill more people than your innovations save. Scientific knowledge that contradicts religious doctrine could trigger persecution of anyone associated with new ideas. There's also the question of whether you have the right to change history. Your innovations could have unpredictable consequences for future development, potentially preventing discoveries or social changes that are important for human progress. Finding meaning in an impossible situation. Ultimately, the decision about whether to stay in medieval times or try to return to modern times comes down to what kind of life you find meaningful and satisfying. Medieval life offers community, purpose, and a direct connection between effort and results that many modern people find lacking in contemporary society. But it also involves limitations, hardships, and moral compromises that many modern people would find unacceptable. Modern life offers individual freedom, technological comfort, and educational opportunities that medieval people could never imagine. But it also involves isolation, complexity, and existential uncertainty that medieval people are protected from by their stronger community bonds and religious faith. The choice isn't just between comfort and hardship, it's between different ways of understanding what makes life worth living. But while you're contemplating these big philosophical questions about the meaning of existence across time periods, you still have to deal with the immediate practical reality of medieval life. And that means preparing for the seasonal cycles that dominate medieval existence in ways that modern people can barely understand. Let me tell you about medieval winter, which is basically nature's annual attempt to kill everyone who wasn't already killed by disease, warfare, or food poisoning during the rest of the year. Modern people think winter is inconvenient because they have to scrape ice off their car windshields and pay higher heating bills. Medieval people think winter is a personal vendetta by the universe against human existence, and they're not wrong. Medieval winter preparation begins in spring and continues through summer and fall, because surviving winter requires 8 months of planning and effort. This isn't just about staying warm, it's about storing enough food, fuel, and supplies to keep an entire community alive for 3 to 4 months, when agricultural production stops completely. The food crisis. Medieval food preservation is a life or death technology that's barely more advanced than what cavemen were using. There's no refrigeration, no canned goods, no frozen foods, and no reliable way to keep anything fresh for more than a few days. Medieval communities have to produce enough food during the growing season to feed everyone through the winter, plus extra to account for spoilage, theft, and unexpected demands. This means that a community needs to produce roughly 150% of their annual food consumption during the 7 or 8 months when food production is possible. Then they have to preserve that food using techniques that work sometimes, under ideal conditions, if you're lucky. Meat preservation involves salting, smoking, or drying meat to the point where it's essentially leather with protein. Properly preserved medieval meat is so salty that eating it without drinking enormous amounts of water will make you sick. Improperly preserved meat will kill you outright. Grain storage involves keeping grain dry, protected from rodents, and isolated from contamination for months at a time. Medieval grain storage technology consists of putting grain in containers and hoping for the best. Rodents, insects, mold, and moisture destroy stored grain regularly, and there's very little medieval people can do to prevent it. Dairy preservation involves making cheese, which requires specific bacteria cultures, precise temperature control, and aging processes that medieval people understand through trial and error but can't control reliably. Medieval cheese is either excellent or deadly, and it's often difficult to tell which until after you've eaten it. Vegetable preservation involves techniques like pickling, drying, and root cellars that work under ideal conditions, but fail regularly. Medieval preserved vegetables are usually nutritionally depleted, unpalatable, and sometimes toxic. Your modern knowledge of food preservation could be incredibly valuable for helping medieval communities improve their winter survival rates, but you have to be careful about how you introduce new techniques. You know that proper temperature control prevents spoilage, that certain preservation methods are more reliable than others, and that food safety depends on factors that medieval people don't understand. But you can't explain the science behind food preservation without sounding like a lunatic. Instead, frame your knowledge as traditional wisdom from regions where winter survival is more advanced. Suggest that certain preservation techniques are blessed by God, that specific procedures follow divine patterns, or that improved methods recover ancient knowledge that's been lost. The fuel emergency medieval heating technology consists of burning wood in fireplaces that lose most of their heat up the chimney while filling the room with smoke that slowly suffocates everyone inside. Medieval people spend enormous amounts of time and energy gathering firewood, and they never have enough. Firewood gathering is backbreaking labor that involves cutting trees with hand tools, transporting logs without mechanical assistance, and processing wood into usable fuel. Medieval communities regularly face the choice between heating their homes and cooking their food, because there isn't enough fuel for both. Many medieval people die from cold exposure inside their own homes because they can't afford to keep fires burning constantly. Medieval clothes are designed for survival rather than comfort. And medieval winter clothing is basically wearable insulation made from whatever materials are available. Medieval people wear multiple layers of wool, leather, and fur that make them look like ambulatory haystacks, but provide minimal protection against serious cold. Your knowledge of insulation principles, efficient heating, and energy conservation could help medieval communities stretch their fuel supplies and stay warmer with less resources. But again, you have to present this knowledge in ways that don't contradict medieval understanding of heat and energy. The light problem. Medieval winter days are short, and medieval artificial lighting is expensive, dangerous, and barely functional. Medieval people go to bed when the sun sets and wake up when it rises because there's nothing else they can practically do. Medieval candles are made from animal fat, burn poorly, smell terrible, and cost more than most people can afford to use regularly. Medieval oil lamps provide slightly better light but require expensive oil and produce smoke that's only marginally less toxic than just breathing fire directly. This means that medieval people spend roughly half of winter in complete darkness, trying to sleep for 12 to 14 hours per day because staying awake in the dark is boring, uncomfortable, and uses energy they need for staying warm. Medieval winter nights are long, cold, dark, and filled with sounds that could be wind, animals, or other people with hostile intentions. Medieval people developed the ability to sleep through almost anything because the alternative is lying awake in the dark for half the day. The social dimension. Medieval winter forces communities into close quarters for months at a time, which creates social tensions that modern people can barely imagine. Extended families live together in single rooms, communities are cut off from outside contact, and everyone is stressed, uncomfortable, and struggling with seasonal depression. Medieval winter quarrels escalate into feuds that last for generations, because people have nothing to do except think about whatever's bothering them. Medieval domestic violence increases dramatically during winter, because families are trapped together in stressful conditions with no privacy and no escape. Medieval mental health deteriorates significantly during winter because there's no effective treatment for seasonal depression, cabin fever, or the psychological effects of prolonged stress. Medieval people just have to endure months of psychological misery and hope they don't go completely insane before spring arrives. But medieval communities also develop winter survival strategies that build social bonds and provide mutual support during the hardest months. Medieval winter storytelling, communal work projects, and shared survival activities create social connections that help people cope with isolation and hardship. Your winter survival strategy. Your first medieval winter is going to be a test of everything you've learned about medieval life, and it's going to push your physical and psychological limits in ways you can't prepare for. Start preparing for winter and late summer by building relationships with people who have experience with medieval winter survival. Learn traditional preservation techniques, help with community food gathering, and establish yourself as someone who contributes to winter preparation efforts. Use your modern knowledge to improve preservation and conservation techniques, but do it gradually and frame innovations as recovering traditional wisdom rather than introducing new ideas. Stockpile supplies that will make winter more tolerable. Extra clothing, preserved foods, fuel, and materials for repairs and maintenance. Medieval winter is hard on everything, and you'll need resources for fixing things that break during the cold months. Prepare psychologically for months of discomfort, boredom, and social tension that you can't escape. Medieval winter tests your ability to cope with prolonged stress, and mental preparation is as important as physical preparation. But winter is just the most extreme example of how medieval life is dominated by natural cycles that modern people are mostly protected from. Understanding these cycles and learning to work with them rather than against them is crucial for long-term medieval survival. And speaking of long-term survival, let's talk about what happens if you not only survive medieval life, but actually succeed well enough to consider starting a family, because medieval family life makes modern parenting look like a casual hobby. So you've survived in medieval times long enough to consider the possibility of forming romantic relationships and maybe starting a family. Congratulations, you've reached the point where medieval life stops being about immediate survival and starts being about long-term emotional complications that make modern dating look simple and straightforward. Let me start with some good news. Medieval people are human beings with the same basic emotional needs, desires, and relationship patterns that modern people have. They fall in love, form partnerships, care about their children, and build meaningful family relationships. Now let me give you the bad news. Medieval society has organized these universal human experiences in ways that will make your modern sensibilities weep with frustration and confusion. Medieval dating, swiping, right on social hierarchy. Medieval courtship is not about individual choice, compatibility, or personal attraction. It's about economic alliances, social status, and family negotiations that treat marriage as a business merger between households rather than a romantic partnership between individuals. If you're a peasant, your marriage options are limited to other peasants who live within walking distance and whose families are willing to negotiate economic arrangements with your family. Since you don't have a family, this creates immediate complications for your romantic prospects. If you've managed to achieve higher social status through your skills and connections, you have access to better marriage prospects, but you also face higher expectations for dowries, social connections, and family background that you can't provide. Medieval people do fall in love, but romantic love is considered a pleasant bonus rather than a necessary foundation for marriage. Medieval marriage is primarily about economic security, social stability, and producing children who will support their parents in old age. This means that medieval courtship focuses on demonstrating your ability to provide economic support, your social reputation, and your family connections, rather than your personality, interests, or emotional compatibility. Your modern ideas about relationships based on mutual attraction, shared interests, and emotional intimacy are completely foreign to medieval thinking about marriage. Medieval people expect to develop affection for their spouses over time, rather than marrying people they're already in love with. The economics of medieval romance. Medieval marriage involves complex financial negotiations that make modern prenuptial agreements look simple. Marriage contracts specify dowries, inheritance rights, property transfers, and economic obligations that affect multiple generations. If you're male, you're expected to provide bride price or demonstrate that you can support a family through your work. If you're female, your family is expected to provide a dowry that demonstrates your value as a marriage partner. Since you don't have a medieval family or established economic position, you're at a significant disadvantage in marriage negotiations. You need to build enough wealth and social connections to make yourself attractive as a marriage partner, or find someone whose family is willing to overlook your lack of background. Medieval marriage also involves taking responsibility for your spouse's extended family, their economic obligations, and their social debts. Medieval marriage isn't just a partnership between two people, it's an alliance between family networks that extends across generations. Medieval sexuality, it's complicated. Medieval attitudes towards sexuality are a complex mixture of religious doctrine, practical considerations, and social expectations that don't map neatly onto modern categories. Medieval Christianity teaches that sexuality is spiritually dangerous and should be limited to procreation within marriage, but medieval people also recognize that sexual desire is a natural human impulse that can't be completely suppressed. Medieval marriage includes sexual obligations for both partners, but these obligations are understood in terms of duty and social responsibility rather than pleasure or personal fulfillment. Medieval people expect married couples to have sexual relationships, but they don't expect these relationships to be particularly enjoyable. Medieval contraception consists of techniques that are marginally more effective than hoping for the best, and medieval people generally expect that sexual activity will result in pregnancy unless God decides otherwise. This means that medieval sexual relationships carry immediate consequences for family economics, social status, and personal health that modern people are protected from by effective contraception and modern medical care. Child rearing in medieval times. Medieval children are not protected, pampered, or treated as the center of family life the way modern children are. Medieval children are expected to contribute to family survival from an early age, and childhood is considered a brief preparation period for adult responsibilities. Medieval children start working as soon as they're physically capable, usually around age 5 or 6. They help with household tasks, agricultural work, and craft production according to their abilities and family needs. Medieval education is limited to practical skills that children need for adult survival. Most children don't learn to read or write, don't receive formal education, and don't have time for play or recreational activities. Medieval parents love their children, but they also understand that most children won't survive to adulthood, so they develop emotional strategies for coping with frequent child mortality that modern parents don't need. Medieval parents don't invest heavily in individual children's development or future prospects because social mobility is limited and family survival depends on collective effort rather than individual achievement. If you have children in medieval times, you'll be expected to raise them according to medieval child rearing practices that emphasize discipline, work, and preparation for adult hardship rather than creativity, self-expression, or personal development. Your modern parenting knowledge. Your modern understanding of child development, education, and healthcare gives you enormous advantages for raising healthier, more capable children in medieval conditions. You know that children benefit from education, that play is important for development, and that children have emotional and psychological needs that medieval parents don't usually recognize. You also know about basic child health care, nutrition, and safety practices that could significantly improve your children's survival rates and development outcomes. But you have to apply this knowledge carefully, because medieval communities have strong expectations about how children should be raised, and deviating too far from accepted practices will make people suspicious of your parenting methods. You can introduce better childcare practices by framing them in terms that medieval people can accept. Present educational activities as preparing children for adult responsibilities. Frame play activities as training for adult skills. Explain healthcare practices as following divine guidance for protecting children. Building a medieval family. If you decide to start a family in medieval times, you're committing to raising children in conditions that are dangerous, uncomfortable, and limiting by modern standards. Your children will face disease, malnutrition, and social constraints that modern children are protected from. They'll have fewer educational opportunities, limited career options, and shorter life expectancies than modern children. But they'll also have community connections, family stability, and clear social roles that provide security and meaning that many modern children lack. Medieval family life offers emotional rewards and social connections that are difficult to achieve in modern society, but it also involves hardships and limitations that modern people are not prepared to accept. Your decision about whether to start a family in medieval times depends on whether you can find meaning and satisfaction in medieval family life, despite its limitations and dangers. But whether or not you start a family, you're eventually going to face the question of how to use your modern knowledge and advantages to contribute to medieval society in meaningful ways. And that brings us to the most complex challenge of long-term medieval life, figuring out how much of the future you should try to create. We're nearing the end of our journey through medieval survival, and if you've made it this far, you probably have a pretty good sense of whether you'd rather face medieval plagues or Monday morning meetings. But before we wrap up, we need to address the elephant in the historical room. What do you do with everything you know about the future? You're sitting on roughly 700 years of technological, scientific, and social development that could revolutionize medieval society. You could introduce innovations that would save millions of lives, prevent centuries of suffering, and advance human progress by hundreds of years. Or you could accidentally destroy everything, the butterfly effect's medieval